they got to put this money somewhere, and it's going to become very visible. What used to be obscured from our vision will become very visible in the very near future. This is why metals are starting to react, and this is why cryptos will go up too. Anything that's considered anti-dollar or dollar alternative is going to increase in nominal price, in my view, very dramatically in the very near future.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance and Reluctant Preppers. This guest is wildly famous with our viewers. Rob Kirby is a proprietary analyst and the founder of KirbyAnalytics.com. He joins us again this Friday, July 24th, 2020. Rob, thanks for joining us again.
Wonderful to be with you again, Donegan.
Before we get to viewers' questions, and there's been plenty submitted ahead of you arriving here today, I wondered if you could just give us Rob's high-level view of the macro picture of what's going on in our world. It's undeniably convulsive, what's going on, but you've generally got a perspective on that most people are eager to hear. In fact, I have to read this. JL Hi-Ho Silver Lining says, I have no questions, but everything Rob says makes sense, and I'm very curious on what he has to say at this time.
Okay, well, what I'm paying a lot of attention to lately, Donegan, I've been doing some communicating with Dr. Mark Skidmore, and Dr. Mark Skidmore and Catherine Fitz are doing additional work in the area of money printing and missing money. And let's just say their original blockbuster work covered the period of 1998 to 2015, where they documented and identified $21 trillion that went missing out of government coffers from the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And these people have continued to do work from the years 2016 onward. And let's just say that if you thought 21 trillion missing was a lot, Skidmore's latest work makes it look very much like 21 trillion missing money is small, because the amounts that have seemingly or possibly gone missing in subsequent years are incredibly large amounts of trillions, additional money missing. So money is being created and printed out of thin air by authorities because it must be printed. And it must be printed because of the fatal flaw in fiat money with compound interest. The compounding effect on fiat money demands that once you reach an inflection point, which we have some time ago reached and surpassed, money growth must be parabolically vertical, or the system collapses onto itself. So what that means is we reach a point where the amount of money printed last year must be bigger this year by a large stretch, and must be bigger again next year by an even larger stretch. And this is what we're gripped with right now. And this is why we are seeing so many things occur in our capital markets that don't make sense. And let me just run through the laundry list of things that don't make sense. We have an economy that's basically shuttered or shut down due to this COVID disease or whatever it really is. And I know people are dying from it, so I don't doubt its existence. I only doubt its origin and who launched it and whether it was launched on purpose or whether it came out of nature. But the upshot of the COVID disease is that we've had probably $3, $4, $5 trillion in fresh money printing, with more to come. I also want to point out that I did state very clearly a number of times last year that the amount of money that would needed to be printed this year would be astronomical. And of course, I didn't know last year at this time that we were going to have a COVID disease. But lo and behold, we have this COVID thing and the money needs to be printed. And I want to just throw this onto the pile as well. The amount of money that is acknowledged to be being printed is the observable tip of the iceberg, because what's below the waterline that we cannot see, not visibly anyway, is very likely tens of trillions of additional dollars that are being created. And let's just say that the latest work that Dr. Skidmore is doing would indicate or be highly suggestive that this money is very likely hiding in the mechanisms of the Social Security trust funds, because we have evidence, or Dr. Skidmore, I should say, and I don't want to steal all his thunder because he's been doing diligent work in this area, and he'll be publishing updates to his work in the very near future. But let's just say that insane amounts of money, like nose-bleeding amounts of money, are churning through these government accounts. Like when you have a retirement account that has maybe $30 billion in assets, having a turnover in a year of $44 trillion, that's obscene, and it's pretty hard to get your head around. Yet government data is stating very clearly that this is the kind of turnover that we're experiencing, or that the government is experiencing in some of these retirement accounts. So you can call it whatever you want, because these are not numbers that are anyone's pulling out of their behind or pulling out of thin air. These are government numbers. This is government data. And Dr. Skidmore has been diligently farming this data, and he's trying to arrive at his own conclusions. He's a lot more polite than I am. To me, I smell a skunk when I read and look at some of the raw data that he has shared with me. But anyway, I'll leave it for him to present this in a very scholarly manner, which he always does. And I'm sure that'll be coming soon. But at the end of the day, I was trying to put a laundry list together of things that we're seeing that are highly indicative of way more money in existence than what is acknowledged to be. And let's start off with, fundamentally, we have an economy shut down. The equity markets, or the stock market, is making new highs. Which is counterintuitive, extremely counterintuitive to me, and highly suggestive that there's a lot more money floating around in the system than one might think. Then we have record low interest rates in our capital markets, in the bond market in particular, and we have record debt issuance by a huge margin. And historically, that would be good reason for bond yields to back up, or to be lower, priced lower, higher yields. But, it doesn't matter how much debt is issued by the U.S. government, yields want to go lower. And that, to me, is direct evidence that there is a lot more money floating around in the system than is acknowledged. Thirdly, we have precious metals, which for the very longest time had a great deal of difficulty gaining any traction in price movement up until very, very recently. And what seems to have lit a fire under the precious metals in the last week was Sprott Asset Management announcing their intentions to raise $1.5 billion to purchase silver for their PSLV fund. And I mean, I know of and am aware of and have been reporting on very, very severe shortages of silver in the not only in the retail market, as in coins coming from the mint, but in the industrial market where big bars like 1,000-ounce silver bars trade. And people that I know who deal in those markets have told me that there has been periods in the last month anyway, where they literally can't get 1,000-ounce silver bars for immediate delivery. So silver has been extremely tight, and lo and behold, Sprott has come along and said that they're going to buy $1.5 billion worth of silver, physical silver, for their fund, because the PSLV fund holds nothing but physical silver. And let's just say, I wish the Sprott Asset Management Company, I wish them great luck in finding the silver. I don't believe there's $1.5 billion worth of silver to be had anywhere in the world right now. But we shall see if they're patient, and if they wait long enough, maybe their order will be full or filled. I just don't think it'll be happening in a very timely fashion. My best guess is they're probably going to have to wait months to get that order filled, even if they have a price commitment on it. And in the meantime, that means that the retail market, the market for coins and bars in smaller denominations, should remain very tight, and prices should remain very firm. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if premiums paid in the retail market get blown out a bit, which should be good for you, Dunnigan, as a procurement person for Miles Franklin. But I mean, this is what we're facing right now in the precious metals market. So, like I say, these are counterintuitive things that you wouldn't expect if money was tight. But money doesn't appear to be tight, despite record debt issuance on the part of sovereigns. We seem to be suffering from far too much money, and I would have it that we're experiencing way more money, evidence of way more money in the system than what is officially acknowledged by monetary authorities. So that's where I think we are. We're suffering from too much.
The progression that you described there, that exponential growth curve that goes parabolic and nearly vertical, how do you?
Well, it's a vertical curve. It isn't nearly vertical. It's vertical, and it's and the rapidity of how fast it's going vertical is speeding up. So we have to print to infinity and beyond, and this is what we are experiencing. This is why I believe in our last interview I might have referenced a family member who procures PPE, personal protective equipment. Somebody who has to procure the goods for doctors to see patients on a daily basis. The disposable gowns that were 50 cents back in January are trading at $50 today. Disposable goggles that were trading at $1 in January are now $30 to procure. You know, if this isn't hyperinflation, it certainly is a very, very healthy dose of stagflation. But I mean, this to me is, these kind of price increases to me will start cropping up in other areas and in other goods, because supply chains are broken to begin with, and B, there's too much money being printed, Dunnigan. So I expect to see more of this and wider spread. But of course, inflation is still being reported at close to zero by authorities who measure. And the only reason why inflation remains close to zero by people who measure it is because they refuse to measure things that go up in price. So if you don't measure anything that goes up in price, of course you're never going to have inflation. But that doesn't really mean there is no inflation. It just means you're not counting it.
Yeah, we've seen and others have that their medical costs and food costs and rent or new home purchase costs and higher education costs are all just decoupled completely and flying higher. We have a related question that has to do somewhat with this proliferation of currency that you're talking about. Chris Williams asks, when furlough payments finish and people start defaulting on loans and mortgage payments, how long can banks last if they already are under massive stress? Does Rob believe governments around the world will have to do universal income as a standard to assist banks via their customers, or will they simply help the banks and not the people?
Well, in my view, Dunnigan, what's occurring in the Western world is a communist insurrection and a communist attempted coup. Certainly in America, I mean, Canada, I believe, is further down the road to socialism than America formerly was. But I believe that the powers that be would absolutely love to bring in a universal basic income because, you see, the problem governments have, as I was referencing earlier, they have to print unfathomable amounts of money going forward. You see, the amount of money which is has recklessly been printed this year. Next year they will have to print more.
That's where I was going with my earlier question about this verticality of this is what in the world can lie ahead?
Well, but Dunnigan, the problem is, where do you put the money? Because you're creating all this money. You got to put it somewhere. Now, there's no doubt in my mind anyway that a lot of it's being hidden and disguised in entities like something I reference often, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the secretive adjunct to the U.S. Treasury. It's usually it's referred to by its moniker letters, ESF, Exchange Stabilization Fund. That's a black box where money is. It's a slush fund, a secretive slush fund, where monetary authorities can stash untold amounts of money, which they have at their disposal and that they can marshal up anytime they need to prevent things like a failed bond auction, like to suppress precious metals prices on COMEX or on the LBMA, that they can use to do secretive off-market settlements for precious metals, to bribe would-be buyers of precious metal out of taking delivery of physical by giving them huge premium rewards over and above what the spot price would indicate they should be settled at. It's a slush fund, okay? And, you know, slush funds, the term slush fund usually connotes ill doings or wrongdoings or let's just say unsavory activity. And there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the Exchange Stabilization Fund is and has been used in this regard for a very, very long time.
Along the way, you mentioned the impact on the availability of and the demand for physical precious metals. Rob McCain says, will the COMEX just lock up soon? And if you have a gain in options or money in your account, what will come of it?
My guess is, in all likelihood, at some point, if you're a holder of of paper-based precious metal through entities like the COMEX, I believe at some point you will end up getting forcibly settled in cash. And, you know, you may have big nominal, when this occurs, you may end up with a big nominal gain in fiat dollars. Unfortunately, when that occurs, those fiat dollars that you get rewarded with probably won't be able to buy the equivalent of what you thought you owned in paper form in precious metal. There is clearly, in my view anyway, a departure between paper pricing of metal and physical metal. And I know this because I'm very aware of premiums that are being paid in the physical marketplace right now. I look for those premiums to heighten, and I look for ultimately people who thought they had access to physical metal by holding futures. I think we'll ultimately learn that they didn't really have access to physical metal through futures. Fiat gains, perhaps, but that will probably be the extent of their good luck.
We have another question about physical possession. Deerfly Guy says, now that gold and silver is on the move upward, large profits will be made if they haven't already been. For those who have precious metals in physical form and in their personal possession, having waited and stacked their silver and gold discreetly for years, taking a hit after the markets went down, are now faced with another dilemma. What now? How do we spend our precious metals? With whom do we do business? Yes, selling back to big dealers has always been an option, but personally, I don't want to be paid in check form for hard physical transfer. I want a discrete transaction for goods or services with as little fanfare as possible. I'm not suggesting doing anything illegal, just trying to understand what are the options for people who, when it goes time to cashing out of their physical position into something else real.
Yeah, well, you see, this gets to the value there is in getting to know your precious metals dealer, because usually when you buy metal from a precious metals dealer, they will be willing and ready to buy it back from you when the time comes. And instead of selling your precious metal for fiat money, you might want to think in terms of barter. You can certainly sell precious metal for cryptocurrency. I know that there are venues where that can be accomplished. And the other thing I think that we're going to have going forward is there will be and markets will spring up all over the place where barter of goods for goods or precious metal for goods or services will evolve and will spring up all across our markets. This is something that's going to come very, very hard, very fast, as precious metals continue to appreciate, in my view. So I don't think that's really a big problem.
You talked about the likelihood of increases in prices of some important real goods. Anti-Ignorant said, buying gold and silver is a good idea for sure, but is buying different physical things as well. For example, if I run a business and produce furniture, would it be a good idea to stock up on wood, fabric, steel, and aluminum and other components?
Absolutely. I absolutely would encourage anybody who makes their living from assembling or by purchasing raw materials to have a good stockpile of whatever it is that they make their income from, to stock up. Storable food is another thing done again, because food will be currency too. And having food with a very, very long shelf life is always a good idea. And that's where you draw your name, Reluctant Preppers, from, is being prepared. A means to protect everything you own is, I guess you can call that firearms, ammunition. Another good thing to think in terms of having sufficient quantities to provide adequate protection for all that you've worked for and all that you've stockpiled. Like physical stuff. I mean, this is what really the whole thrust of owning physical precious metal is about, getting your investable net worth into tangibles. And tangibles can take many forms. Tangibles could take the form of productive farmland. Tangibles could take the form of material goods that would be, essential or required should the economic conditions worsen or become more difficult. I speak in terms of precious metals only because I put them at the pinnacle of what people are going to be drawn to as money becomes real.
This, I think you may have just answered this question, but the way it's asked might trigger some additional thoughts for you. David Roach says, thank you both for what you do. Rob, pretend you have a brother that just woke up from a 25-year coma in an Ontario hospital. What list would you tell him to run out and do right away to get ready for what's coming? Maybe that's the list you just said.
Pretty much, sure. It's, I guess Gerald Celente says it very well. Guns, grub, and a getaway plan. So, these are fundamental things that everybody needs to pay attention to. And if you haven't done adequate preparation in any of those areas, you might really want to think about getting with it very soon.
One more thing we were talking about before we started the interview was about health. And that's something else you didn't mention just now, but it made me think about that is your well-being and how well you're taking care of yourself. That's something you were sharing about.
Yeah, well, listen, I had a big health incident last year where I very nearly passed away, and apart from let's also at the same time let's throw in spiritual health too. Getting right with your God, whoever it is probably a very good thing to do. But on the physical side, I've gone on a very major health kick, and I've altered my eating habits and my lifestyle, and I'm heavily into exercise now. I've dropped a lot of weight, and I'm feeling extremely good right now physically. And that involves for me daily exercise, intermittent fasting, and just getting healthy. And I'm probably in better health today than I have been in 5 years, and I continue to work at that because if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. So there you go. I absolutely believe in that.
We have, I think you've also treated a related question to this one, but I think this is put in a very specific way that might be meaningful to a lot of the viewers. Tim Teven says, nobody has said anything about veterans benefits. What will happen in the future? There are millions of us.
Well, veterans benefits are paid for and ultimately come out of the general revenues of the government, and anybody who is reliant on a government pension or government benefits going forward, I rather suspect there's a strong chance that your benefits will be reduced or diminished over time, because government finances, in my view, are a complete and utter mess, and the state of them, even as bad as they are a complete fabrication versus what they very likely the true state of them are. So from that standpoint, that's like a double reason why you need to take it upon yourself to do what you can to help yourself in the future, as opposed to relying on governments to do it for you. Government's finances will be worse in the future than they are today. That's a given. So if governments are having trouble meeting their obligations today, it's going to be doubly hard for them in the future. So keep that in mind.
It's strange, this whole thing about the Keynesian economic fiat model and the runaway exponential growth of currency, and then having to try to find somewhere to shove all that currency is so strange when you think about the national debt, the bankrupt states and municipalities, the underfunded pension plans, the overburdened unemployed taxpayers, all these things. It's like it's so ironic. There's this dichotomy between we've got to create all this currency, we have no idea what we're going to do with it, and then there's all these crying needs of where it could be used. But the problem is it that creating more of the currency just creates more of the debt? That's the two sides of that coin.
It's like a hamster running on a wheel, and the hamster has to run faster because the wheel's going faster. And with this money creation, it's like a self-fulfilling disease of, the more you create, the more you have to print, which means you have to print more, which means you have to create more. But it's like the wheel just keeps spinning faster and faster. And the output of all this craziness is that you end up with a huge festering pile of money that you need to put somewhere. And you see, Dunnigan, if like, it's become very common to hear the word universal basic income now, even in the mainstream press, that this is being thrown about as an idea. Like, this is very supportive of the idea. I mean, universal basic income is a massively expensive program to even contemplate. But the fact that they're even contemplating it now tells you that there has to be a lot more money around than anyone acknowledges. Because this is a fabulously expensive thing to even contemplate. But they're contemplating it. Why? Because of money. Like, why is there never a consideration? We hear it bandied about. Your country talks about invading, possibly, or going to war in Venezuela, going to war or having further involvement in Syria. They talk about possibly having a conflict in Iran. And then there's China, and then there's North Korea. There's never, ever. When is the last time you heard anyone say, can we afford any of this? Never. There's never even a consideration about whether it can be, it can be afforded. And if they need 3 or 4 billion or trillion more for COVID relief, then they have money for that too. I mean, and then the universal basic income, how many trillions is that going to cost? You see, but the real issue is the trillions are coming, and you see, and what they don't want to do, they don't want the trillions that are coming and that have been created already. They're trying to keep them from impacting the domestic economy. This is why so much of the spending or utilization of the money is concentrated on offshore and on military pursuits, because it keeps the direct impact of the money creation or the domestic economy and keeps people believing in the myth that there's no inflation. You see, what they don't want is runaway prices in America in consumer goods. And this is what they're trying to avoid at all costs. And frankly, in my view, even that's going to become impossible to do. It's sort of like trying to hide, an elephant in the ashtray of a Volkswagen. It doesn't fit. And the amount of money that's being printed doesn't fit in the historical places where they put it. So this is why lavish spending ideas can be floated and contemplated, because they got to put this money somewhere. And it's going to become very visible. What used to be obscured from our vision will become very visible in the very near future. This is why metals are starting to react. And this is why cryptos will go up too. Anything that's considered anti-dollar or dollar alternative is going to increase in nominal price, in my view, very dramatically in the very near future.
Well, Rob, you've always got a lot for us to think about, and always give us a very sobering but fresh and frank perspective, and people appreciate that so much. That's why we always look forward to being able to have you back on. Just grateful for you visiting us again, this time on Liberty and Finance and Reluctant Preppers.
Been my pleasure, Dunnigan.
If you've decided that now is the right time for you to protect your family's financial future by acquiring physical precious metals, gold and silver, I'm delighted to let you know that I have now become a licensed dealer's representative for Miles Franklin, one of the oldest and most trusted names in bullion dealerships. And we can provide you with physical delivery to your personal possession or to professional vault storage or precious metals IRAs. Just email me at libertyandfinance@protonmail.com, and please include your name and phone number in your email to libertyandfinance@protonmail.com. We'll get right back with you and find out how to best meet your needs so that you can either begin or increase your acquisition of physical precious metals now and protect your family's future starting today.